this evening based on the following. We will allow the applicant's presentation of the changes of the what was submitted in the January meeting of 45 minutes. We will hear public comments for 60 minutes. We will allow the applicant to respond to the questions of the public comments for 45 minutes, and then the commission then will take 60 minutes to discuss and ask additional questions. So if I hear no objections from my fellow commissioners, that's at least the intention of how we'll conduct the meeting.
Chairman, would perhaps between the presentation from the applicant and before the public testimony of maybe just a short period for Q&A or Q&A during the 45-minute presentation?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And I think in terms of the commission, we can interrupt and ask questions at any time. So we don't have to wait for the applicant to make their full presentation. If it helps to speed things along. So, Mr. Adler, if you'd please state the case.
Case is 2019 P3, 1210 Central Avenue. It's a request by Optima Wilmette for a special use to permit the construction of a mixed-use building containing commercial space and 109 dwelling units in the VC zoning district, pedestrian commercial west. You do have a number of letters, which most of them were emailed to you, but these letters were received after the packet went out on Friday, so you do have physical copies of them. There's a couple, I believe 3 new letters that came in between around 5 o'clock in this meeting, which are in there. And the applicant did drop off a new packet, and it's my understanding the applicant will go into detail on this. The changes in this have to do with the glass color and the building color because of the glass now being proposed as clear and that variation no longer needing to be required. The applicant's changes were summarized in the staff report. I'm not going to go through those. We'll let the applicant present those.
Is the package we have here, is it the same package that we received 4 or 5 days ago, or is this updated? Updated. Thanks.
The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mark Siegel, Senior Vice President with Optima, here with a number of my colleagues. Tonight, I'm joined by my colleagues Bill Duke, a Senior Vice President with Optima, Matt Sison, a Senior Vice President with Optima, Hal Frank of our law firm Meltzer, Pertil & Stell, Louie Abuna, President of KLOA, our traffic consultant, Amy Rosenfeld-Kaufman, Director of Development and Community Relations of Community Partners for Affordable Housing, Taylor Corbin and Fran Fazio of Manhard, our civil engineer, Mike Stopka, Associate Principal, Strategic Sustainability of Borough Happold Engineering, who will speak to some of our sustainability initiatives, and Aaron Hillman of Collaborative V Design Studio, Inc., who is serving as our landscape architect for the project. We are really excited to be here before you today to present the updates to our program. We spent a lot of time as a team thinking about what was said at the Appearance Review Commission on January 6th, what we learned here from you, the Plan Commission, and from the members of the public on January 7th, in our ongoing dialogues with both the village staff and members of the community to try and respond to the concerns and questions that we heard over the course of that period of time. And so now I'd like to walk you through the changes that we've made to the program that was presented to you on January 7th. The first request that we heard at both the Appearance Review Commission and here at the Plan Commission was changing the Central Avenue street frontage to try and activate the frontage to bring more transparency to Central Avenue. And so what we've undertaken is a complete redesign of the Central Avenue frontage. We've placed the community amenity space along the exterior of the building to provide active engagement with the project by relocating all but one of the residential units along Central Avenue. So now we only have one residential unit on the Central Avenue frontage at the very western end of the development. We've replaced the garden wall stone panels along Central Avenue with floor-to-ceiling glass running 110 feet, creating ground floor transparency along Central Avenue for the project of 89.3%. You may recall that at the last meeting, we're actually asking for an exception under the code to not satisfy that transparency requirement of 40%, and now we're at 89.3% in terms of our program. We've reduced the height of the garden wall stone panels throughout the project from 7.5 feet to 6.5 feet. This has resulted in an increase by 1 foot of the height of the clerestory window at the lone residential unit remaining at the western end of the project along Central Avenue. There was also a request to create more setback, and so we've increased to 5 feet the setback along a 50-foot stretch of the Central Avenue frontage immediately to the west of the residential entrance, and we've added landscaping throughout that setback. We've worked with the village staff to provide for the elimination of the large planter beds along Central Avenue to the west of the residential entrance to provide for the enhanced pedestrian traffic area that the public had asked for. We've preserved pedestrian circulation area and on-street parking by retaining the existing fire hydrant at the corner of Central Avenue and Green Bay Road. That's something that we worked on with the village staff and the fire department. We've added an additional street light to the east of the alley and set back the garden stone wall 11.5 feet from the property line to provide a visibility corridor for pedestrians and vehicles that are interacting at the alley and the sidewalk along the western end of the property. We also received a request to reduce the perceived presence at street level of the rooftop amenity space and the elevator overrun. So here, too, we've also undertaken a complete redesign of the rooftop space and added additional landscaping. We've reduced the height of the elevator overrun, which is the tallest portion of the building, but comprises only 205 square feet of area for the entire project. We've reduced that from 81 feet to 79.92 feet after working with our elevator consultant to try and bring that as tight as we could to the building. As you are well aware, we have an amenity area on the roof of the building, but the height of that space is only 72.67 feet. There was concern expressed about the visibility of the elevator overrun from the neighboring rights-of-way. So we relocated the elevator overrun approximately 25 feet north into the interior of the building to eliminate its visibility from nearby public rights-of-way. So now the elevator overrun is set back approximately 65 feet from the southern property line, 100 feet from the northern property line, 98 feet from the eastern property line, and 121.5 feet from the western property line.
Question. Is it possible that you could take us through these designs with, these changes with designs in front of us? It's hard to kind of go through the written word litany of changes without kind of, if you could show us on the plan type of a discussion instead of did this, and this, because we've read a lot of the changes, but it's a lot easier to see if you could walk us through them, or is that?
Happy to do whatever the commission wants.
That would be terrific.
Okay. So what I'd like to do, one of the things I'd like to note before I go to plans is that in the course of conversations with both the Appearance Review Commission and the Plan Commission, there was some questions and concerns about the color of the glass that we were using, our color palette for the project. And we had previously proposed bronze glass and a dark brown aluminum window wall system and slab edge. And as a result of the explorations that we had undertaken for different colors of glass to use, and the fact that we had requested an exception for colored glass under the ordinance, we started exploring what we could do differently. And as a result of that exploration, one of the most significant changes in what's new in the packet that you have before you is that we're proposing now to go with a clear glass as opposed to a colored glass, eliminating that additional exception that we had asked for. And we've changed the metal color to a dark gray. And so you'll be seeing what that dark gray and clear glass looks like. We'll talk a little bit more about this when we get into more of the discussion, but part of what we've been able to do because we've moved to the clear glass is be able to more meaningfully respond to the request of members of the community for us to enhance the bird friendliness of the design of the building. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So here you see the first rendering of the development with the new look. So to just highlight some of the changes that you're seeing here, and Colin, could you put up the first board so members of the community can see, get a better look of what that rendering looks like?
Are the windows, is it a mirror finish on the window, or is that?
That's the
is that
glare
how
of
it's
the sun.
rendering?
That's the glare of the sun off the, this is an early morning rendering showing the glare of the sun off of the windows there. So you can see, and you'll see the grayness, the clarity of it come through in the other renderings as well as we move forward. Well, part of what you'll see here is you can see along Central, you look right here, we've completely changed that frontage. The stone panel used to run all the way to the residential entrance there and extend beyond. And now we have all of this frontage being completely transparent glass, engaging the public along that frontage. The other meaningful change that you'll see here is the introduction of Optima's vertical landscaping system. So we've incorporated something that we had hoped to do originally, and after working with our landscape architect, we've identified native plantings that we believe will be able to not only survive but thrive in the Wilmette climate to be able to provide an accent there for the vertical landscaping. So what that does for us is it creates a different element in the design of the building, creates shadow, creates different visualization of the facade. And then you'll also see we've added 3 trees along the southern facade of the building at the roof, as well as 3 trees on the eastern facade of the roof. And what that does is that provides additional landscaping, which was one of the other comments that we received from the community, as well as providing an additional screening element for the rooftop programming. So
I want to just reiterate, those plantings on the balcony will be green year-round?
yes, they may go dormant, but they will stay green. And we've got our landscaping architect here who will go in more detail to that at the end of the presentation.
And has that been used in the Chicago area before?
He'll speak. We have not used this system as we're presenting it in the Chicago area, but he will explain his experience with using comparable systems in the Chicago area.
Thank you.
This is maintained by management, not by tenants?
Absolutely by management. So the whole point is that we're creating a uniform aesthetic for the property. So we work with our landscaping contractors for us to maintain those. That's not planter boxes for individual residents to plant whatever they desire there.
Do you have to access their apartments to get
We
to
do,
this?
yeah. And I will say that while we don't do this in Chicago today, we do this at a number of our communities in Arizona. And as part of our preventive maintenance program for the apartment homes themselves, we coordinate with our landscaping contractor. We go in, we change filters, we do the landscaping, we check other things in the apartment, so it's one time we go in. Here again, you're seeing, this is an update of the rendering from across the street at the metro station. You're seeing the landscaping here again. And here you have the tree plantings.
And what's protruding from the roof there?
So right here, you're seeing the mechanical screening, just a hint of the mechanical screening at the top of the building there. This gives you a better view of the Central Avenue frontage. So if you recall thanks, Colin. If you recall, the stone panels went all the way to this residential entrance here and then continued to an extent here. And we've now opened this up with 110 feet of floor-to-ceiling glass. This is the area that's set back 5 feet, this 50-foot run that is now landscaped. And here you can see we've conformed to the traditional tree grate in this area of the property that consistent with the eastern section of the Central Avenue frontage as well as along Green Bay Road.
How would that sidewalk compare with the sidewalk in downtown Wilmette? How wide is that sidewalk?
It's consistent with the standard sidewalk in downtown Wilmette. Here again, you see the context image showing the 611 building here and our development here. You can see the screening trees. Here you can view the amenity space, the enclosed amenity space on the roof. But what you don't see and what used to be visible right here is the elevator overrun. So we've, by recessing the elevator overrun by that 25 feet that I mentioned earlier, it's completely invisible from this vantage point. Here again, this is a perspective looking east from Central Avenue and Park, and you don't see the elevator overrun here. You do see the amenity space. We have 5 trees as a shelter here as a screening element here along the western facade of the property. You'll notice one of the differences based on the conversations we've had at the last meeting is these trees are going to be maintained at a height no greater than the amenity space, whereas the trees on the southern and eastern facades will rise above the amenity volume as a more robust screen. This is a look to the interior. This is a view east just to the north of the intersection of Central Avenue and Park Avenue. This is an interesting condition. You don't see anything here, but I just want to note that this is a side yard that exists at this corner that doesn't exist anywhere else along Park Avenue. There are homes along the frontage of the balance of Park Avenue in this area. So when you see, this is the winter condition looking over that side yard and the townhomes that are there. And there you can see the top residential floor in wintertime and the amenity space. This again is the rendering that we showed you previously from looking west from Central Avenue at the intersection of Central Avenue and Wilmette Avenue. And here again, you really can't see the elevator overrun. You get a hint of the amenity space. The most predominant view you get of the roof is of those trees. So here we are with the level 1 plan. This highlights what we've changed in programming along the Central Avenue facade. So we've shifted here, this orange area, the darker orange is amenity space that used to be on the interior courtyard that's now being relocated along the frontage. The same here, and we maintain our management office in its original location. This is the 50-foot run with the 5-foot setback and landscaping. This is a 15-foot setback at the entry to the residential lobby. Here we have the pre-existing 10-foot setback for the covered indoor-outdoor space along the retail. And back here, you see where we have created that cutback in the stone panel. The stone panel goes along from this remaining unit to the rear here. It cuts off and then continues along the western frontage. But that's where we've notched it to create that view corridor for the sight lines. between pedestrians and vehicles.
In
One of-
in looking at the elevations that were sent in the package we received on Friday,
Yes.
I couldn't tell what the extent of the stone wall is along the alley. Does that continue north to the ComEd pad?
It
Or
actually
does it-
continues all the way here, and when we get to the elevations, Mr. Chairman, it'll be more clear, but it actually encloses the dog run
Okay.
that's here as well. So you run from this location all the way over to there,
Okay.
and then you'll experience the garage panels there. One of the other requests or pieces of feedback that we, one of the other pieces of feedback we received was, can we cut back the landscaping that was serving to buffer the garage entrance and the loading areas here to provide an opportunity for delivery trucks to pull through rather than pulling into the loading areas and backing up and disturbing our neighbors to the west. And so we've cut back that landscaping to facilitate that type of vehicular access for the delivery trucks. Here you can see the setback of the elevator. So it used to be right about here, and we've recessed it here. And other than that, the basic programming on the first floor remains the same.
Can you talk a little bit about the retail? I've had a number of people reach out to me and with concerns about the depth of the floor plan and the suitability for restaurant space. And so I'm not sure if that's what the plan is restaurant space, but I know that the building 611 to the south has had a hard time leasing, and we're always concerned about vacant storefronts.
So, at the last meeting, we brought our colleagues, thank you. At our last meeting, we brought our brokers, SVN, to the meeting to talk about the suitability of the space for restaurant and retail use. They opined as to their experience. They're actually active in the Wilmette market, and the space as we've depicted it is actually consistent with space that we recently leased in another project of ours. And so we really have no concerns about what we're going to be able to, I should qualify that. It's a tough retail environment. There's no question about that. There's about 20,000 square feet of vacant retail space along Green Bay Road right now in Wilmette, not counting what may or may not happen with the Imperial Motors site. So it's a challenging environment. There's no question about that. We think one of the advantages to our site is the corner location. We've designed the glass facade to make it more inviting and engaging with the pedestrians. We've tried to create indoor-outdoor dining space opportunities for people, and we think that's a materially different engagement with the consumer, with the pedestrian, than exists at the 611 property. The other thing that we're doing is we're providing on-site parking, public parking, 23 parking spaces that the community and customers of the retail users would be able to take advantage of that didn't exist at the 611 property. And that's another reason that, based on my conversations with people who looked at that project, that was a concern that they had. So we believe that in a challenging retail environment, we've addressed those issues in our design. We've gotten positive feedback from some of the retailers and restaurants that we've spoken to. Nothing's done yet because we don't have a project yet, but we're encouraged by the opportunity, and we think that it's more of an apples and oranges comparison on a retail basis between our project and what exists at 611.
And are the floor plates comparable between this and 611, notwithstanding the interior-exterior piece? The depth and the depth from sidewalk to back of house?
So the configuration is different. 23, thank you, Bill. But just as an illustration, what we've tried to do here is illustrate potential layouts I don't know how clear that is for you to see, but we've actually laid out a restaurant here that uses a divided space. So there's actually a floor plan here for a restaurant with indoor-outdoor seating. This has about a 95-foot depth. So it depends on what your reference point is for how you're calculating the depth of the space. And for us, having that amount of depth of 95 feet, and again, this is comparable to something we just leased at a project of ours in Chicago. And so we think that this works very well, and then leaves space over here for a traditional retail user. Similarly, and I don't know if you can see that. So we've got at this dimension here, let me see if I can do it this way. This dimension here is 57 feet 6 inches. You've got the 10-foot outdoor space dining area. We've got a 39-foot wide seating area before you come to 2 restrooms at 21 feet. We then provide for a kitchen at 40 feet. And that's the dimensioning of that space. But the total here gets you to about 95 feet in terms of depth. And here the remaining retail space is 30 feet at its narrowest and 42.5 feet here at its widest. And as we discussed at the last meeting, we've extended this service corridor around to contemplate the potential division of the space into 2 uses. If we didn't have 2 uses, this is, I think I went. And this is what a plan would look like if we had someone take the entirety of the space for a restaurant. This is a 65-foot wide kitchen, 65 feet long, 25 feet wide, 17-foot wide seating area here, a reception area off the lobby, and an 18-foot wide bathroom there. And again, 42.6 is the depth here, and we have an 82-foot run till you get to those bathrooms there. So we've laid out, we've worked with designers to lay out what people could do with this space, and we're absolutely confident that it can well accommodate a restaurant and other retail uses. To be blunt, this is our front door, and we have to make it successful. So we have no interest or desire in designing something just to deliver a project that won't get occupancy. So that's really what we've been focused on, is making sure that we can appeal to the right retail users.
Jumping back quickly to the alley, you had made space for people to be able to pull in without having to back out. Would they pull parallel to the alley between and not be in front of the parking ramp? Is there room there for cars? Is that how you envision it?
Yeah, so they would pull in and basically pivot in this area here in the loading area so as not to block the parking ramp. So they could come in this way, or they could come in this way and circle through. Did you follow?
Yeah.
Okay.
But there's enough room for a car but without covering the
Yes.
parking ramp on both sides?
Yes.
Do you have any letters of interest or other expressions of interest in that space from retailers or restaurateurs?
Nothing in writing. We've had expressions of interest from some people we've spoken to, but at this point, until we know we've got something, people are not particularly anxious to get engaged.
What would be a typical depth for retail space?
Probably 40 to 60 feet deep, 60 feet deep would be a customary depth.
But that's assuming a narrow of street frontage.
Yeah, right. I mean, as I said, it depends on,
You've taken the retail space and rotated it 90 degrees.
we've twisted it. So we've got as I said a moment ago, Mr. Chairman, thank you, that we actually have a 95-foot depth when you look at the access point off of Central. Here we have the roof. Again, this is to highlight, bear with me because I want to. Sorry about that. So here again, we have the 5 trees along the western facade that would be managed to stay no higher than, grow no higher than the amenity space. One of the things that we've added, the 3 trees here along the southern facade and 3 trees here along the eastern facade. Here you see the recessing of the elevators, again from here over to here. That provides a setback. We've narrowed the size of the amenity volume. There was a request that we try and shrink the footprint on the roof deck, so we've done that. We've reduced it by 11.1%, so we've taken it from 6,750 square feet to only 6,000 square feet of the overall 31,000 square foot roof area. You may recall that we discussed at the last meeting introducing pergolas on these 2 roof terraces, but we have eliminated the contemplation of adding pergolas on the rooftop. One of the other things to just note about landscaping is that we did talk to the village forestry, work with the village staff and the forestry department, and there's agreement that we can increase the caliper of the trees we're planting at the outset of the project from 2 inches in caliper to 4 inches, so that we'll have more developed trees at the opening of the project. Yes.
Noting the very nice rooftop greenery and trees, but is there anything aside from the flowers and the street trees, is there any open space at all contemplated that is public and shared, or is it really the building cover the lot in all sides?
So the building doesn't cover the lot in all sides. So we've got, if you were to, if we look here at this open space here,
That's behind a wall.
it is behind the wall, but just in terms of the lot coverage of the overall building, we're not building lot line to lot line. So if you take this space, the landscaping here, and the interior courtyard here, which again is not public space, but is space that is set aside, that is open space in the building.
Is that behind a wall?
That is behind a wall. And that's to accommodate the fact that the party who owns this property can build to the north lot line, and so we're trying to create open space to create light volume in the building as it goes up. So for us, that means that roughly 72% of the site is covered, 28% is open here, and as you go up the building, taking just this courtyard area and the rear of the building here, it's 21% open space as you go up the height of the building.
Is there any public open space that, I mean, are there benches or any seating? I know that you have the restaurant, but is there any amenity that would be a public amenity aside from the street trees?
So, again, here we're asking for an exception to not not build lot line to lot line, which is one of the requirements of the code. So we've set it back to create this landscaping. Along the Green Bay frontage, there will be bicycle racks, there will be and some benches along the Green Bay frontage. But those are the pieces that are programmed on the public sidewalks there.
We can't hear now. Can we turn up the mic volume?
Can you hear me now? Okay. Is this volume okay with the commissioners? Okay.
Can you go back to the roof plan?
Yeah.
And I just want to clarify, I think the point that was made at the last hearing, we see a lot of green on the plan, but the green is not necessarily landscaping. It's unoccupied roof. Can you clarify the specific landscaping areas versus what's just going to be whatever the roof treatment is?
Absolutely. So the landscaping will be the trees that you see here on the western facade, the trees on the southern facade, and the trees on the eastern facade. You then can see a multicolored ring around the roof terrace that follows here. And that is a landscaped area. That is the only landscaped area on the roof. So what we talked about before at the last Plan Commission was what the other roofing materials would be, and I want to clarify something because I misspoke at the last meeting. We have a roof membrane obviously on the roof, but in addition to that membrane, we have a material called T-Clear. So here you see, this is, bear with me if you would so that I can speak to what specifically. So T-Clear is a 2-foot by 4-foot composite roof covering material consisting of rigid insulation and a colored cementitious board. It locks together in a tongue and groove manner across the roof. So here you can see that material on the roof, and you can also see one of the tree plantings we have at one of our existing developments. That's a sample of the T-Clear roof material.
So that's not walkable surface, right? Or
It's not, so the residents will not access anything other than this space. The light-colored areas are the only accessible areas for residents outside. They're walkable surfaces for maintenance purposes, but not for the average resident to go on.
pretty light. How is it adhered? How's it locked down? Are you saying that it just holds it in place?
No, it's adhered to the roof membrane. In that photo that I showed is an existing installation.
Okay, Mr. Siegel, we've got about 10 minutes.
Okay. One of the other things that we'd like to call attention to I'll let our landscape architect, this is the vertical landscaping that exists at one of our projects in Arizona, just so you can see how that looks in the desert condition. One of the things we've done as part of our interactions with the community, there was a request for us to try and make the building more bird-friendly. And so...
Sorry, can we go back to the pavers that you have
Okay.
on the roof? you have these in Arizona, which is a totally different climate. Here you're dealing with, I believe, higher uplift loads. You're also dealing with a lot of freeze thaw. Have you used this material here in Chicago area?
You need to address the microphone.
The reason I'm asking this because I know that IBC has pretty high values for uplift, roof uplift, and I just don't know how this will hold up to it.
Sure. My name's Bill Duke with Optima. Regarding this system that we have used in quite a few projects in Arizona, you're correct, the climate's very different here, but there is a similar approach. We have more insulation required for this climate, but the roof, the membrane is on top of the concrete slab, and then you are providing the insulation above that. So you're able to achieve the R value that's required by code with that insulation.
I'm not really worried about the R value. I'm worried about you've
The
got
uplift?
concrete, you've got the membrane, and then you've got the pavers. I call these pavers.
Yes.
These light pavers right on top of the
Right.
membrane.
Well, the
So
pavers...
they're pretty light.
Yeah, you're concerned about the wind uplift,
Right.
is what you're saying. Well, two things are going on there. They're interlocked, as you see in that detail, and then they're also adhered at locations on the panel itself. So you're putting it down almost like a flooring product where the whole membrane becomes interlocked. And that's, I mean, it's warranted to work in that sort of situation, that
Where
installation.
in this area have you used them? In Chicago?
We have not used this in Chicago, but we can get the manufacturer's information that warranties such an installation. We'd be happy to
I'd
provide
like to
that.
see the specs.
Okay, we'd be happy
you.
to get you that.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
you said there's about five or 10 minutes left for,
Based on the schedule that I outlined, at the pleasure of the commissioners, we can keep going.
okay. I was going to suggest that maybe spend a couple more minutes and then maybe focus on the public benefit component to the changes and to the project.
Okay. Well, one of the public benefits that I was going to speak to was that we've had conversations with members of the community who've desired that we try and make the building's design more bird-friendly. And so while it's counterintuitive, the focus for risk mitigation for bird friendliness is actually on the lower portion of the building. And so what we've tried to focus on is the first 3 floors of the building for bird friendliness as a supplement to the existing bird friendly aspects to the design of the building. And we've selected that because that is the focus area of what LEED has laid out. LEED has created a pilot credit for bird deterrence, bird collision deterrence, and they focus on the first 3 floors of the building. And so what we're proposing to do is to use glass materials that would have the requisite bird threat level categories as determined by the American Bird Conservancy to use on the the first 3 floors of the building surrounding the building. And so what we're saying is that we would achieve an estimated Zone 1 bird collision threat rating based upon the materials we're looking at of 14.3 in comparison to the LEED pilot credit standard of not more than 15. So we satisfy the LEED standard for bird friendly, and that's in addition to our use of terraces, which are another bird friendly tool, the fact that we use metal guardrails as at the terraces instead of glass is another bird friendly tool, and that we've built into the interior of the building all of our interior corridors so there will be no light pollution as you go up the building, and we've put timers on the rooftop lights. Here you can see the images of the areas that would be covered by the bird glass as you go around the perimeter of the building. So we've eliminated a number of exceptions that we had previously requested, most notably the fence exception. We reduced the height. As I noted earlier, we're eliminating the colored glass exception, and we have also eliminated, apologize. The garden wall stone panel, the other one was the transparency. So we've eliminated the exception because we've added 110 feet of transparent floor-to-ceiling glass along the Central Avenue facade. In terms of the public benefits that this project will deliver to the community, we're going to deliver, we're committed to deliver a minimum of 2 Green Globes out of a maximum program rating of 4 Green Globes under the Green Globes Building Sustainability Certification Program. That's analogous to achieving a LEED Silver building certification. We've said that we're going to enhance the bird friendliness of the design of the building. We're making a $1.6 million donation to advance affordable housing opportunities in the village that's going to be potentially levered into $2.9 million for SEPA to deliver 14 affordable housing units in the village of Wilmette. We're providing for 23 on-site parking spaces for public use that will be available for those who wish to shop, dine, or be entertained in the village center. Use of those public spaces will be limited to no more than 2 hours. They'll be monitored by a tow service engaged by us, and they won't be permitted for valet parking, and all of that's in the interest of trying to generate turnover in the parking garage for the community to use. And then in addition, we're providing 2 electric vehicle charging stations, which will be the first electric vehicle charging stations for public use in the village center. And then we also have identified a number of the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan and the village center master plan that we believe that this development satisfies.
I don't want to take all the questions if others have them.
Please proceed.
Let's see. Starting with the Green Globes, I'm curious why not the LEED, and I guess beyond that, just candidly, the LEED Silver seems like not really a public benefit type of a standard. That's a pretty baseline standard in this day and age. If it was 10 years ago, maybe that would seem like a little higher level standard. But 1, why Green Globe? And 2, not a 2 out of 4 seems a little bit of a middle ground, and certainly not something that you might pitch as a public benefit. It's a pretty straightforward sustainability standard.
So we've selected Green Globes for a number of reasons. One of the reasons is the ongoing engagement of the Green Globes process as we're going through the design and construction of the building to make sure that the goals are achieved. The other component that we find particularly impactful is that Green Globes provides for an audit process as you're going through the Green Globe certification, and it culminates in an on-site physical inspection of the development at the conclusion to make sure that you've delivered what you've said. So the LEED process actually says you fill out some forms, you submit it. If you can check the boxes, then they'll send you the certificate that says you've achieved the LEED certification. We wanted to hold ourselves to a higher standard, and the Green Globes process actually provides for an auditor to come out and do a physical inspection of the property to make sure what we say we're going to do, we've actually delivered. And we think that's very much a community benefit to make sure that that's being done. As I said, our goal is our commitment is to achieve LEED Silver. Our goal is to try and exceed LEED Silver. But today, we believe a commitment to achieve LEED Silver is a public benefit.
Hold on, is that
I don't know that much about LEED. So.
Sorry? We can have I have our sustainability consultant here to speak to what Green Globes is and what we're going to do, if that would be of interest to you.
You've covered it.
Yeah.
On the affordable housing component, how did you come to the $1.6 million as the proposed donation?
As we looked at what we could achieve in terms of a program with SEPA, and as we looked at what the project could sustain, that's how we came to the conclusion.
Meaning, is it a percentage of the total development cost, or you backed into the number out of, I'm not understanding the answer.
The answer is we came to a per unit cost and value for what we were proposing, and that's what we proposed to the village. And then we worked with SEPA to leverage that so that it could turn into the $2.9 million.
And is SEPA here?
Yes, it is. Yes, they are.
Could you talk a little bit about how you see this actually turning into housing? I think it's been a challenge to see affordable housing developed here.
So this would fit right into our regular land trust model. SEPA's a land trust. We develop units very much in this model. That's our sort of core function for the land trust. So we would go out, acquire units just like you would, and then rehab them and sell them or rent them at an affordable price to people who qualify based on income.
In Wilmette?
In Wilmette. So with $2.9 million, we can get, we believe, 14 units over 4 years. And that's acquisition, rehab, and then, of course, there's the sales proceeds built in. So for the houses, the for sale units, of which there's 10, 5 at 80% and below of area median income and 5 at 120% and below. And so those sales proceeds will help, with the cost. And so that's how it works. It's been very effective in other communities that are very similar to Wilmette. And they're permanently affordable, so they stay in the land trust. So you buy the house first, and then you buy the house second, and you buy the house third, so you leverage that investment over time.
So what would be the acquisition price that you would try to achieve for under your model?
I don't know exactly. My colleague Rob did a look in the market to see what was available in the price range that we would target, which I'm guessing would be in the $250 to $350 range, depending on, the economics have to work. Your acquisition and development costs have to equal X plus the proceeds. Mm-hmm. And we have some money, we do fundraising, and we're able to bridge some gap, but that's basically how you want it to work. You want acquisition and development plus proceeds to equal your cost. And yeah, we think we can do that in Wilmette. And we've really built enough subsidy in so that we think we can spread these units out throughout Wilmette. They should not all be clustered in one area.
I guess I'm having a little trouble, Matt, finding those units that meet the baseline price as a starting point on anywhere, and certainly not in a non-clustered way.
Okay.
Any other questions at this point in the presentation?
I have a few, yeah.
Yeah.
It was a pretty clear comment from the Appearance Commission, and was again picked up at the last hearing, asking to meet the standard for the ground floor height of 14 feet. And I see that you've come back still maintaining that 13-foot line, and I'm just wanting to understand the rationale for, because that seems like an easy fix. Just boost up that ground floor height to 14 feet and take another piece of relief off the table, I guess. That seems like an easy one. I'm curious as to why you didn't do that.
We didn't do it, and I guess we heard a couple of voices express a concern about that issue. And I think from our perspective, we believe that the 13 feet is sufficient to attract the right retail tenants. And with the floor-to-ceiling glass that we have ringing the property, we thought that would further enhance the engagement with the pedestrians and enhance the retail experience for people. And given the sensitivity of overall height to the project, and the fact that we felt that we achieved the pedestrian engagement and the retail use, we didn't see it being beneficial to the overall project to increase the height of the building.
Like, maybe I'm the lone voice on this one, but it seems to me like that 1 foot is more impactful at maintaining providing a pedestrian scale, so that 1 foot would be more impactful at the base as opposed to at the height. And, you know, we have other height issues to cover. It seems like that 1 foot is more, it's an important piece to not just attracting the right tenant, but maintaining a pedestrian scale. And I think it helps the balance the proportions of the building itself, such that when you have a shorter ground floor presence, it just kind of, it makes the building seem all that much more imposing.
I guess our sense, if the commission wants us to increase the height of the building further, we would be open to that.
Did you study any other massing, such as, did you look at all at shifting some of the massing away from the west side of the property and perhaps even pushing it onto the east side?
Well, we already have a 25-foot setback at the west side of the property, so and given the height concerns for the overall development, we didn't see an opportunity to shift more mass to the east.
And again, I understand that sensitivity, but I guess similar perspective on that one, it would seem that the mass on the west side of the property is more impactful to the neighbors than it is perhaps if placed on the east side. And while we're talking about sort of the trade-offs of height versus mass and building and bulk and scale, I would suggest I'd be more open to entertaining height relief on the east side of the property more so than perhaps on the west side of the property, particularly if there's a way to kind of shift that scale over and away. And sort of as a follow-on, you know, I don't know, and perhaps you've studied this, whether that would, what impact that would have on the visual impact of the building itself, the line of sight, things like that, and the shadow studies as well. It would be interesting to understand that.
So as we discussed at the last meeting, we conducted these shadow studies to show the effect of the building, the effect of shadows on the neighboring properties. We've refined the comparative study here to show you the comparison of what we're proposing to build to what is allowed under the existing zoning. And for this purpose, we've made sure to include the permitted height encroachments under the zoning code. So it's 52 feet plus 2 feet for a parapet, plus additional space for a screening wall, plus additional height for an elevator overrun. And what we've done is we've also added, if you can see it in turquoise on the plans, what the impact of the shadow of our elevator overrun and rooftop amenity space is. And so what you can see has been further refined from what the last meeting illustrated, which is that there is not a material difference in terms of the shadow being cast by our building compared to what could be built under the existing zoning. There are a couple of instances where that is not the case, but very limited instances at extreme times. And in no instance, in only a couple of instances does the amenity space actually cast a shadow off of the building, and in no case does it cast a shadow beyond the shadow of the building base itself. And if you were to, again, as you can kind of perceive here, the arc of the sun is coming this way. And so when that happens, if we were to shift volume over here, that would create a higher element to cast shadow and cast shadow further than the building does currently. So that was one of the reasons. And then it's really the same images as we go through. You can see how tight the shadow comparison is in these comparisons to what is allowed under the existing zoning ordinance. Different times of day, different seasons of the year. Then here we wanted to show the context of the neighborhood. So here is our development. This is the Imperial Motors site. Here is the townhome development to our west. And here you have a series of single-family homes along Park Avenue. And the smaller structures are the garages for some of those single-family homes. And then those single-family homes continue further north along Park Avenue. And it was, I think, Commissioner Schwab, when you were asking questions about the shadow study, that you inquired about the sightline impact that Commissioner DeGrino is now raising. And so we prepared this slide that shows you the impact of our building in comparison to what an underlying zone building would be. And this shows a number of different perspectives. So the first thing that was raised was, if someone's on the roof, what are they going to see? So there were two perspectives. What do people in our building see, and what do our neighbors see of the building? So because there is no walkway on the western side of the building, as we talked about when we talked about the roof plan, the furthest someone can be on the roof to have a sight line would be to stand at the western facade of the enclosed amenity space. And as a result of the setback of that amenity space, you have to navigate the angle of the edge of the roof of the building. So that means this person here on the rooftop can't see anything. All of this purple area is not visible to someone who is standing on the roof of the building. We then go to our top floor is here, but the underlying zoning, this would be the roof. So someone standing here would have an angle of sight, but again, you deal with whether or not the second townhome is in place here to screen that view, or whether it's coming down into a backyard along Park Avenue. But this area from the roof is invisible. We then decided to look at what would happen if someone was standing in the backyard of a home along Park Avenue that did not have to deal with the two townhome condition and only had to deal with one townhome. Because if you look back at the site context, this is the only double townhome situation right here. In other instances, it's one townhome with garages and backyards. So what we did was we said, if you're standing in a backyard here along Park Avenue, what are you going to look up at? And you're still obscured by this single townhome that is the easternmost run of townhomes along the western side of the alley. And so the visible area for those folks only ends up being this space, which again would catch the space up to the 62 feet here, which could exist under an existing building built to the lot line, built under the existing permitted encroachments. And again, because of the setback of our amenity space, someone standing in the backyard doesn't actually perceive that amenity space because of the angle and the fact that they have to be looking over the townhome. This final one is what happens at the sidewalk vantage point for Park Avenue. Someone standing here, and of course this means that there's no landscaping obstruction, there's no home obstructing the view, but they still have to deal with navigating the townhomes, and those people would be catching this view. But again, they're clipped off here because of the recess of our amenity space on the rooftop. So we did try to look at what the different conditions for sightlines would be, and we hope that this diagram with a number of moving pieces to it illustrates the different perspectives that people from the building will have and people looking at the building will have.
And sorry if I'm making you repeat yourself, but just the difference between the 62 and the 52?
So the 62 is our base roof in our building, right? The 52 is the base roof of the underlying zoning.
Yep.
So one of the components of relief we're asking for is to go up to that 62. The point we're making then is that while we have some additional components on the roof, we're asking for additional exceptions for the permitted height encroachments, that those height encroachments really don't impact what's being viewed to the west, just because of the way we've set it back. But what would impact or could impact if someone were to build under the existing zoning is if they built those conditions here to the lot line, or to the end of the building, excuse me, because this design does accommodate the 25-foot setback from the west. So that's what we're trying to illustrate, is that we're trying to take what we're proposing and comparing it to what someone else might be able to come to the table with under the existing zoning, and comparing and contrasting what the sight lines would be.
Any other immediate questions?
I have one more.
Okay.
I promise. One more. Could you go back to the ground floor layout? And I'm hoping you can clarify the orientation of the dwelling units that appear at the,
West side?
yes, thank you, southwest corner. Are those, the primary entrances are internal to the
Oh,
building?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I guess is, I understand why you would do that, and that makes sense on the one hand. On the other, it seems to then orient the rear of those units to Central Avenue, and then, of course, necessitating the screening wall that you have there, which is, you know, in tension with creating a pedestrian-friendly environment.
So that stretch of the stone panels is now 30 feet of unit plus another about 10 feet, so about, well, no, it runs about there. That's about 20 feet probably. So it's about a 50-foot run of the stone panels with the clerestory above it for the one unit that sits along that one corner in comparison to the about 140-foot run of that stone panel that we had before.
Okay.
And this would likely be, you know, the entrance is from the interior of the court up, is from the interior of the building, but we don't view it as being the back end of the unit on Central Avenue.
Any other questions from the commissioners at this time? Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll now move into the public comment portion of the meeting. Again, we'll budget 60 minutes to do that. I'd like anyone who's wishing to speak to try to limit their comments to 3 minutes. If you spoke at the January meeting, all of your testimony has been recorded and is part of the record. If you have additional comments that you did not express at January, you're welcome to express those. I would ask that if a previous speaker has made the same point that you wish to make, that we're not hearing the same testimony over and over again. We have received quite a few communications from residents that are, again, part of our package this evening, both for and against the proposal. I know that we have received several lengthy letters. Please, this evening, don't stand up and read your letters. They are all already part of the testimony. We had a fair amount of discussion in January regarding the affordable housing units being within the development or not within the development. The developer has chosen to move forward with a donation to the village. So I would appreciate not revisiting the fact that we do not have affordable units within the development. We've also received a number of comments regarding the appearance of the building. The appearance of the building is not before the Plan Commission, and there is a wide difference of opinion as far as whether the design of the building is attractive or not, is appropriate or not for the village. And I leave that to the village board to make the ultimate decision. So within those parameters, we'll now take 60 minutes and open up the floor for comments. If you wish to speak, please identify who you are and your address. So the floor is now open. Yes, sir.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Bob Sermon. My address is 1033 Green Bay Road in Wilmette. This property does not impact me. I'm more near Elmwood. I appreciate all the work that you all do. I used to do it about 15 years ago. I was in the Plan Commission and actually helped rewrite the PUD. It was, back then it was very rigorous. You had to have 60 to 70% of your architectural plans completed before you could submit. So it made it prohibitive for developers. And I'm currently a zoning board member and a commercial architect. I'm a little concerned about the setback. I haven't spoken at previous meetings. I haven't attended or even viewed them. I'm a little concerned about the setback on Green Bay Road, on the east facade. I worked early on as a plan commissioner on the 611 building, and we really pushed to have that building set back that amount. And to then go back and overhang is what appears to be happening, is a compromise. You couldn't do that in some other villages. I know you couldn't do it in the city of Chicago, at least with the whole elevation. That wouldn't be acceptable. But my main concern is, and I'm not sure if you've addressed it, is the north lot line. And this is something that we dealt with on the 611 property that ran into a couple different meetings, was what's happening on the lot line and how does it impact the neighbor? Is the project being created injurious to the Imperial Motors project? Because again, you couldn't do this in the city of Chicago where you built right along there. I assume that's all spandrel glass? Yes. It is, okay. And it has proper fire ratings, or it'll have the protection? Will it be glazed internally or externally? Externally? Okay, so that runs into just, and I'm talking about in the future, what happens when Imperial Motors, they have the same right to build right on the lot line as this development. So they could build right up to that spandrel glass with a concrete block wall, and they'd have that right. Now, as a rental, it's not that big a deal, but if it gets converted into condominiums, that could be a problem, especially how do you maintain it if they have the right to build a concrete wall. So now you're impacting, I'll make it quick. I see you're looking at your watch. So now you're impacting the Imperial Motors property by building right on the lot line. And also all the balconies, they could build a wall a solid concrete wall right up to that. Now, do you have all those people with balconies complaining, well, I can't do it? We ran into the same issue at 611, that you could, if you're on that balcony, they'd have a right to build a balcony there too, and you could give your neighbor a cup of coffee across the railing. So it may not seem that big a deal, but it does impact Imperial Motors and just the long-term maintenance and the fire. So that's it. Yeah, and it would, if it was a condo or a rental, now you don't have any light into that courtyard space, or limited light. So, thank you.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. Good evening.
Hi, good evening. My name is Christine Moran. I live at 823 Ashland in Wilmette. I'm not going to comment about the on-site affordable housing, but I did want to comment about the amount. The $1.6 million seems a little disingenuous for 14 units. That would be approximately $114,000 a unit. Even if they are able to leverage other state and county resources to get up to the $2.9 million level, that's still only $207,000 a unit for creation of affordable housing. I just did a quick Google search. There are 6 properties on the market for under $200,000 in Wilmette. So just doesn't seem that the amount is reasonable for this development.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name's Annie Finnegan. I live at 930 Oakwood. And yeah, thank you very much for all of you doing this and the time that you take to do it. So one thing just out of the gate, the initial meeting on this was a Monday directly after the school break, just had gotten back, which in a village with so many people with kids. I took a look, and the 611 building was also, the second meeting of that was also a Monday right after we got back from break. And I would just like to put out there that if there are going to be big developments happening, that the meetings not take place the Monday after we get back from a school break. Anyway, so that aside, I'm a huge fan of transit-oriented development. I lived in Boston, within half a mile of the train station and the MBTA station, and we bought our house here also within half a mile. I've been riding my bike more. I passed a guy on a bike riding here, coming here. He was coming from the commuter station. And I helped work on a project in Boston that was for the Forest Hills Metro station. Well, no, it's not Metro anymore, sorry. But basically the same thing. How do we build more transit-oriented development? My concern, which I'm not sure everybody would agree with, but there it is that 1.65 parking spaces is too much per dwelling unit. I took a look online to see local reference. The idea of the transit-oriented development is to decrease car ownership and to decrease car usage. You're right across the street from the metro station. Evanston study at peak demand, and I can give copies of this, is 0.94 spaces per dwelling unit at peak demand. Recently approved, they range from 1.15 maximum. The minimum was 0.7 spaces per dwelling unit. The recent ownership, they had a whole list of buildings. The average is 1.19 per dwelling unit, and that's in transit-oriented development. We need more, if transit-oriented development, we're all going towards biking. My kid's biking. He's not going to be driving a car. Our house only owns one car. Uber's coming, bike lanes are coming, all this stuff is happening. So along those lines, my concern is this building for transit-oriented development. I took a look at where the residents would put their bikes, and it's horrible. It's like you have to drive your bike down a little alley and put it in this little room. I'm concerned there's not enough bike storage. I'm concerned where you have these 1.65 spaces per unit, that maybe instead we could use some of that space for more bike storage, or a bike station on site that could be a public amenity where people can repair their bikes. And so there's my big thing. Also, the Green Bay Road bike racks don't look like much, and I'm just concerned there. And I'm just looking down the road at where all this is going. Other things, I'm going to cut myself off, but I'm sure people have looked at this, but just in case. RTA, an oversupply of parking encourages automobile use. Their thing on transit-oriented development, their maximum is 1.5. In addition to that, we've got 23 public spaces, which I just don't think that that's all necessary, and we need to push it more towards bikes and people taking the train and the Linden Station L. And did anybody look at this reflection heading east in the morning? And also at nighttime, what are people seeing when they're looking into the units through the glass from the metro station? Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks
very
for
much.
your work. Thank you.
Good evening.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for your time. My name is Susan Carroll, and I live at 712 Park Avenue, whose backyard you were looking at. when we were doing the line of sight study. So I want to reference that, the line of sight slide that was up when we were looking at from the rooftop, since it obviously impacts myself and my neighbors, both in the townhomes and on Park Avenue, since we literally were looking at my backyard. I appreciate the line of sight from the roof, but for those of us that are to the direct west as neighbors, I'm assuming that there are residences in the 6 floors above there, and they will have windows and or balconies. And what was not referenced in the line of sight slide was the fact that those people are likely going to glance out their windows, look out their windows, and or sit on their balconies should there be those on that side. And they presumably would also have line of sight, and therefore would be looking directly into our homes, into our backyards, into our windows, for example, our bedrooms and our children and all of that. And that was in fact not in the least bit referenced in the line of sight information there, and should be part of the discussion here. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. We'll get you after this gentleman here. Are you together? Sure. Okay, great. Good evening.
Hi, my name is Paul Doty, and I live at 1924 Lake Avenue.
And I'm Amanda Nugent. I live at 500 Lake Avenue.
We are coming here to wanting to lend our support and our appreciation to the efforts that Optima is making towards remediation for bird strikes. While this may seem like the lowest priority of what you're addressing here tonight, it does make a difference in our community. Since 1970, we've seen the population of birds in North America reduced by 30%. That's some 3 billion birds. Bird strikes are the third leading cause of mortality among birds. Obviously, loss of habitat is the number one. Number two is feral cats, and bird strikes is number 3. The fact that Optima is doing this voluntarily and at some cost to them, we want to acknowledge that effort and applaud it, and we think that it's really reflective of the values of Wilmette. Amanda and I have both volunteered in turning people on to birds and showing them the wildlife that is in our town here, and as well as we've worked with efforts. We've taken, if anyone has a 7th grader here, they've met Amanda and I when we've taken them out on a day of nature at Skokie Lagoons. And what I've learned from that is that there is a big segment of our population that really values a commitment to maintaining habitat and wildlife within Wilmette. That's reflected in the efforts that of what went on at Gilson Park a couple of years back and creating that huge acres and acres of natural habitat. And that was a big community-based effort where hundreds of people came out to plant that over the course of 2 days. And Mr. Siegel, I don't know what the value is of these efforts that you're making, but I know that by doing this, Optima is setting an example by doing this voluntarily to be a leader, and that it will reflect the values of our community, and thank you for putting those efforts in.
Thank you.
And I know we've had some communication, again, from the Appearance Review Commission expressing the same sorts of concerns. And I know from the research that I've done is the Chicago metropolitan area is one of the hot spots for the number of bird deaths from striking buildings, just because of our position on migratory routes.
It is, and we're also at the unique, not just on the deaths side of it, mortality side of it, but also in the, we are in a unique position along the lake of being in the migratory path. And so I think, again, with the creation of the bird sanctuary at Gilson, and I think that we have a unique opportunity here along the lake to really invest in our commitment to sustainability and being a habitat-friendly place. So I think it's a way that we can really shine and continue to show our efforts and commitment to the wildlife. So thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Barb Bischoff-Kleeman. I'm at 1223 Washington. I'm at the house all the way down on the alley at the north end. I would also like to thank you for all the work you did after listening to all of us to come back and find really great solutions for things. I had 3 items that I thought maybe there might be some discussion on. Don't laugh. Edgewater Beach has the pool down underneath. Has there ever been any thought to relocating the pool down below the residential areas? The bulk of the building is still too massive, but I love what it is you're trying to do. Discussion on cumulative impact with the traffic in the alley. We know that that's a problem. Is one-way, making it one-way southbound. Is there any discussion, thoughts there on how we can resolve that? Because once you add the Imperial Motors piece in, we've created a street there. And still going for it, the green roof idea. Thank you very much.
Mr. Adler, I understand that the village traffic consultant is here.
They are, yes.
Okay. Would they care to address the issue of traffic in the alley?
Probably a good time.
Great.
Good evening, Chair Bradford, members of the Commission. I'm Dan Manus, Village Engineer. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Peter Lemon with Kinley Horn Associates. He's a professional traffic operations engineer that we hired to review the traffic study related to this development. So he can take over from here.
Good evening. Peter Lemon with Kinley Horn. As Dan mentioned, we reviewed the traffic study that was prepared by the applicant's traffic engineer, and I think at the last meeting they talked about how we reviewed it. We didn't have any significant comments or changes in terms of the methodology, the data that was collected, or the conclusions that were drawn. So I'll kind of jump right to the question I think that was raised about whether the alley should be two-way, one-way, if one-way, which direction, things of that nature. So right now, the proposal is to keep the alley as a two-way alley, serving adjacent residences and businesses and so forth. Alleys are generally, the purpose of them is for access and circulate, loading access, parking access, and things of that nature, service, which is consistent with the plan. I think if there was anything I would maybe suggest for the alley, I would hesitate to want to make the alley one way. I think when you try to solve a problem doing that, you start to create some other unintended consequences. So for example, if it was only southbound, then all the traffic is coming from Washington on down. If you make it only one way, then everything is going north that direction. So one thing to maybe consider if we're concerned about increasing alley activity to the north is to have, you can't really control easily how people come into the parking, but maybe how they go out. You could orient traffic, only to the south, to Central. There's not a lot of advantage to really want to go north and exit to the north of the alley. It's going to take you longer than if you went to Park or if you went to Green Bay Road anyway. So if you were looking to maybe apply some sort of change or restriction, that would be the one I would think that might be worth considering, is making outbound traffic southbound only from the garage. Then people can access the signal on Green Bay Road and go north probably more easily than they would be going north through the alley anyway. So that would be my one potential suggestion to consider.
And do you have any, how would you operationally do that? Do you have recommendations for that?
Well, I think there's really not a really good opportunity for physically deflecting traffic to the south. So I think it's signage primarily, and then you have to look at, I don't want to say you get into enforcement. Hopefully that wouldn't really be an issue, but I think, you're going to have, you can probably work with the vendors in terms of the loading activity, like trucks and things of that nature. And then I think signage directing people. I don't know that there's really a good way to do like a half pork chop or something that you might see like at a typical driveway. But I mean, just from a practical standpoint, the quickest way out of the parking garage is to go south to Central anyway. So I think that naturally would start to take care of itself. But signage and things like that could be.
We've been told the alley is wide enough. By how much is it wide enough for the traffic you see? Is it just barely?
So I think the alley is, I want to say it's 20 feet. Yeah, 20 feet, which is correct. And so it's also, wider on the south end. So it can handle, the two-way traffic, particularly on the south end. The thing that you find in alleys a lot of times when you have a lot of traffic is, if you have utility poles or dumpsters and things like that, that effectively kind of reduce the alley width. So I think just from an ease of access standpoint, to and from the south is also a lot easier.
Is 18, would that be too small? I'm trying to just judge if we're right.
Yeah, I mean, I would say most alleys in Chicago, where you have a lot of them, are closer to like 16 to 18 feet. So 20 feet on the south portion of the alley is certainly wide enough. And if you think of it as travel lanes, you have two 10-foot travel lanes in that case, which is plenty wide for two-way traffic.
Are there obstructions in the alley?
They're more to the north, where you don't have, the older buildings to the north don't really have alcoves or insets for dumpsters, so you do typically have dumpsters kind of on the north end. But on the south end, through their part of their plan is to, kind of have the wall and the dog run and so forth. So I would say from the parking to the south is pretty clear.
Thank you.
Yep. I'm around if you have more questions.
Thank you. Yes, sir. And we'll get to you next.
Good evening. My name's Joe Lunkes. I live at 811 Park Avenue, and I thank you for your service to the community. You're stewards as members of the Plan Commission for our community. And I'm a little dismayed about the position that you're put in. This back in January 2011, after extensive years, this architect neighbor talked about the master plan that we had gone through. And that master plan talked about the plan unit development. It set the building heights. It set guidelines for having a streetscape running all the way down Green Bay Road. It also talked a little bit about appearances and having cornices and breaking a building up into 3 sections. And, that was all embodied in April 1st, 2014 in the zoning ordinance. And I'm dismayed because I'm sitting here today and I hear us nibbling around the edges. We have a building that's, 20% higher than what the ordinance calls for. And in that master plan, they talked about developing the properties, and they specifically mentioned the auto complex around the Village Pantry. They talked about Wilmette Auto Care and the lot behind it. They talked about Imperial Motors. They talked about all the available land that could be developed into transit-oriented housing. And, of course, at 611, we got about 75 units dumped there, and we, as a village, agreed to waive the plan and approve these variances. Now, Optima is here today, and I don't know how it got this far, but they're proposing a gross expansion of what's allowed under the law. And I haven't heard any convincing reason from these gentlemen as to why it's appropriate. We talk about the birds being killed. Hey, one of the easiest ways to minimize that is let's reduce the building 20% back to the height that it should be. And so to you, as the Plan Commission, as stewards of our community, I'd like to ask you to think about what your vision is for our future, because you're reviewing this building with blinders on in a discrete view, nibbling around the edges on these, getting these little concessions for public benefit. When I'm worried, that you approve this, the precedent has been set, and now every other property comes, and the norm is, hey, we get a variance. We can go 64 feet. We might even go 74 feet because, heck, it's in there. So as members of the Plan Commission, I would think that you're following the blueprint of our comprehensive plan, and I'd really appreciate your thoughtful response as to why you're considering these variances, and how are you going to address it when the next person comes up. And I have one final comment, and call me a conspiracy guy or something, but there was some talk of the light well. Certainly you could turn that light well and face it west. My understanding is Optima tried to buy the Imperial Motors, and they had a 4-story within the zoning on the north side where Imperial was, and a 2-story where the bank is located. Apparently they failed to secure the landowner at Optima to sell the property, so they came back with this plan. I would ask myself, will we wake up 3 years from now when Optima buys the Imperial Motors and they have a twin tower to the north with a beautiful 2-rise in front with common area on top of it, two courts looking towards one another? I'm not suggesting any nefarious activities by these gentlemen, but we have a zoning ordinance and we have a plan to try and maintain the integrity of the village and have some structure to our development. And to be looking at this building absent any other considerations for the entire area, I think is short-sighted. And I think you owe the community a position on this before you approve this, so that the community knows what's going to happen and how the Plan Commission is going to react to the next developer that comes along. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate your work, and I really hope that you give it some thought, because we need the tax base, we need the transit-oriented development. There's a lot of good things about this, but we have rules that we put together, and I haven't heard anyone argue why this gross overbuilding is in the village's best interest. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Booth. Good evening.
Julie Nelson, 714 Elmwood. Well, I'm going to echo many of his thoughts, but a friend of ours who is a new Wilmette resident but had recently moved from Colorado and was a developer there was shocked that a plan that was developed, the master plan was developed, and yet we're still considering these variances. I think we can do better. What is the point of having a master plan if every time a developer comes in and we're just going to crumple up the plan and throw it in the trash? So I would encourage the plan and the village board later to maintain the specs and the spirit of the master plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Good evening.
I'm Jeff Axelrod. I live at 631 Central. So I'm part of the Wilmette Justice team. And I recognize that Optima has already decided not to include on-site affordable housing. But the Wilmette Justice team and I believe that the public benefit would be substantially stronger with on-site units than with Optima partially funding a land trust program. The building is a fantastic opportunity, being right across the street from our metro station, walking distance from Jewel. If units were on-site, residents in affordable units could feasibly live with one or no cars, making housing even more affordable, and could reduce traffic and parking requirements. I respectfully ask you to have Optima come back with a new plan that includes affordable units on-site. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Bradford. I'm Beth Drucker with Go Green Wilmette, and just would like to read a brief letter from the board of Go Green Wilmette. We, the Board of Go Green Wilmette, have reviewed some of the many sustainable features incorporated into Optima's PUD project proposed for 1210 Central Street, and we support Optima's efforts in this area. We especially appreciate Optima's commitment to incorporating bird-friendly features in the design of the building to reduce bird collision injuries and deaths, especially the use of bird-friendly glass in the first 3 stories of the building, the most critical zone. We also support additional bird-friendly design features, including facade breaks with terraces and metal railings, no visible indoor landscaping to attract birds, common area lights not visible from the outside, rooftop lights on timers to turn off each night, and native plant habitat. We've lost approximately 30% of our bird population in the last 50 years. Responsible communities and developers have an opportunity to carefully consider the impact of building design on wildlife. In fact, the New York City Council recently approved legislation that is the most broad-reaching, bird-friendly building policy in the country. We are pleased that Optima and Wilmette will be leaders in this effort to develop a bird-friendly building that will serve as a model for other developments and communities. Our endorsement of these bird-friendly features is based on the assumption that these features will be included in the final building plans. Thank you very much. Sincerely, the Board of Go Green Wilmette.
Thank you very much. Yes, ma'am. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Dalia Kanash. I live at 747 Laverne Avenue, so I'm not directly impacted other than being a village resident. I have 3 questions for you. The first one regards parking on this site, and I'm actually going to go in a very different direction from the previous questions. So as you know, metro parking is fairly limited in the village, particularly in the cold season. I remember being 9 months pregnant and walking for 15 minutes to metro. So has there been any consideration being given to a partnership with Optima to offer more parking on this site? It is a unique opportunity to offer parking on the west side of Green Bay Road, eliminating having to cross the tracks. So that's a question.
Well, I think the discussions taking place to date is that there is a portion of the parking that's dedicated for public parking. And
I'm assuming that's for the retail use, however.
And the intent is that the duration of the parking would be limited to 2 hours, essentially to prevent commuters from parking there. Right. So it was really more serving customers to the retail space, both in the development and elsewhere along Green Bay Road.
Right, so no consideration being given to like offer day-long parking for Metro?
That has not been discussed to date, no.
Okay. The second question has to do with the exact type of retail that's being considered for the ground floor. I know a lot of young parents, such as myself, would love to see a daycare on this site due to the proximity of the Metro parking lot. So that's just a note. And 3, I want to make a point about, like, Optima is a very reputable developer. They hold on to their buildings. They have, like, a unique model. So I think it's a great opportunity for our community to get a high-quality development that will be well-maintained into the future. As many people are aware, a building needs to make financial sense to go up. So I'm sure a lot of the height increases that are being proposed are due to that factor. So I just want us to be aware that if this building goes down to 52 feet plus the parapets, that it might just not go up, and we'll be stuck with the, International Bank. So, all right, that's it. Thank you.
I know from experience with design of early childhood centers that there are certain outdoor space requirements that are tied with operating daycare. And with the constraints of the site, it probably is not the best location. But I would agree, again, as a grandfather, having available daycare that is convenient to the metro station or the village center would be a great thing. First you and then you. No? Okay. 2 of them right sitting behind each other. Okay. Good evening.
Good evening. April Cesaretti. I live at 935 Oakwood. I've lived in Wilmette for 10 years. Ugly, site pollution, uncharacteristic, too big, too tall. You mentioned we're not supposed to really talk about appearance because that's going to be discussed with the village board. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So then let me pick and choose some of my other comments that I have. In particular, regarding sort of the overall look that Wilmette wants to go towards with its architectural style of different buildings. This is a 100-plus-year-old historic North Shore town, charming, Main Street, I don't know, what are some of the other small town charm feel? When I see this particular building, that does not bring those things to mind. Also, according to the Village Center Master Plan, it was recommended that a more comprehensive set of design guidelines should be developed to supplement the Village Center Master Plan recommendations. And so I pose a question to whomever at the village level. Were those design guidelines developed for our village? If we continue to have developers coming through with varying degrees of what they think is a good idea, we're going to continue to end up with a hodgepodge of styles in the village. Also, according to the Village Center Master Plan, as this gentleman mentioned, many of the recommendations for future builds and renovations I don't see in this project. Interesting architectural details and features are encouraged to provide layers of interest and variety for pedestrian and motorists. Variations in roof lines are encouraged to add interest to and reduce the massive scale of large buildings. Adjacent buildings should have component parts in good proportion with another. Similar design linkages should include placing window lines, belt courses, et cetera, et cetera. That goes along with the fact of, are we considering what else is going to be built along Green Bay Road and what the vision of that is supposed to be? Building scale and massing should be determined by the relationship of the subject site to adjacent structures. Again, what is the plan for Green Bay Road? A stretch of 6-story buildings to tower over our village? One other comment I would like to make is that the other 6-story building already built on Green Bay Road, too tall, too massive of a structure for the location and for our small town charm village. That building should not be set as the precedence of things to come on Green Bay Road, and we should learn from that mistake, the approval of that building, and not do it again. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Alexandra Cole. I've lived at 1046 Linden in Wilmette for over 36 years. So I've seen a lot of things. I've seen a lot of plans come and go, things that worked in those plans, things that didn't. I've seen things that have been built of right that I would argue are, in my opinion, ugly, massive, intrusive, of right have the ability to have things look in my backyard. I am living in one of the oldest houses in Wilmette. I love Wilmette. I love contemporary architecture as well. And if Frank Lloyd Wright was here and presenting this in 1920, people might have had the same feelings about what he presented. If we hadn't had him, think of what Oak Park would be today. Maybe not the same. And it is a beautiful community. A beautiful community can have a lot of structures in different designs. It's not the appropriate thing for the village to dictate the design. In fact, you can talk to architects in the village. The Architectural Review Board can only do certain things, and they have nothing to say if you have the ability to build certain things of right. So I really appreciated the shadow study and various of the other things that showed even if Optima wasn't asking for any of the exceptions that they're asking for the 10 feet or whatever, many of the same things you would have no say about if they complied. And people would still be looking in your backyard, just like people are looking in my backyard now from the Verona and the building that was built to the west of that. We haven't found it intrusive. I do not find it gross. I am not bothered by having 109 paying taxpayers on Green Bay Road instead of what is arguably one of the ugliest buildings in Wilmette, the International Bank of Chicago. And I know the Imperial Motor site will struggle to be utilized as well. And where 611 was, the Jacobs site sat there forever. There are things that have worked in the master plan. There are things that didn't. I mean, the master plan down-zoned a lot of things, including our house. We could have leveled that house. That was the second president of Wilmette's house, and built 4 townhouses over the entire lot coverage as a matter of right. We lost that right when the master plan was put into place. Didn't bother us, because that's not why we bought that house. But as a result, we have seen many things built on right that have not gone through this kind of review and thoughtful design. I think a lot of times people come to the meetings when they have objections because this is their forum, but I think it's nice when people also come to the meeting and say, I think this is really good for us and we should think about it. I like the idea of the contribution to affordable housing. We need it in this village. And my Google search came up with a lot more housing that was able to be bought within the $2.9 million that SEPA would have available. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Andrew Gustafson. I live at 720 Park Avenue. I did speak at the January meeting, so I won't redo those comments. More wanted to speak.
We also got a very nice letter from you as well.
You did.
That is included as part of our.
I'm not going to go through the letter either. I more want to speak for people who aren't here. Our neighbors and I, so the townhomes and the people, our neighbors in the single-family homes next to the townhomes, we drafted a petition to object to the size and scale of the development and encourage you all to make sure the development is within the zoning ordinances and more in line with the master plan. In order to get support for that petition, but also just to increase awareness of the project within the residents of Wilmette, we created a survey so we could send to people to just make sure there was awareness of the project, because most of the people we talked to had no idea, and also just to get additional feedback from people. As a result, we got 160 residents to support our petition. 200 residents, 200 households in total completed the survey, and I want to be able to share some of those results so that their voices can be heard, because we've heard some of the voices of the people who are here, and not everybody can make it to these meetings. We asked a few simple questions. Only about a third of the residents had no idea of the development at all. About half of the residents were underinformed of the development. Approximately 90% of residents feel like the village has not done enough to educate people about the development. Less than 10% of people supported the development as is. Approximately 87% felt it was too large, and 75% felt it was too large and they didn't like the aesthetics of the building. The vast majority of respondents, so once again, 200 households responded, the vast majority encouraged the village to stick closer to the master plan when looking at this building. It's important to note, too, that the 12 neighbors who supported the petition were directly affected by the building in terms of our privacy. He likes to talk about the shadow study. As my neighbor Susan pointed out, there's more to this building in terms of the size and scale than just the shadow study. But also importantly, most of the people who respond to this survey aren't directly affected by the building. Most still objected to the size and scale of it for the reasons that others have pointed out here. mostly as it relates to the small look and feel of our town, the impact that'll have on our town, or the perception the impact will have on our town, as well as looking at the master plan, what was envisioned for this site compared to what we're proposing today. Lastly, there's been some talk about the public benefits that they're proposing as a result of this development, and we asked the question after describing to people what those were, what their view of was it whether you thought the public benefits proposed represented an actual benefit to you, and 82% of respondents said they don't feel like it represented a benefit to them at all. 10% said they represented somewhat of a benefit, but not enough to support the exemptions, and only 8% of people said they felt like, yeah, that's an actual benefit to me. So, in conclusion, just wanted to make sure the voices of the people who took the time to support the survey as well as the petition were heard. We'd encourage you to read them. In addition to the summary of the survey we provided to you, there's feedback from 75 residents providing more context on their feelings about the development. And we encourage you to read those and listen to them, even if those people aren't here, because it represents voices of people from the community.
And we have received that summary as well. I appreciate the effort that you've gone through to collect the information for us. It certainly, I think, is going to be beneficial in the discussion.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else care to speak? Going once. Going twice. At this point, I'm going to close the public comment portion of the program. I will give the applicant now approximately 30 minutes to respond to comments that were made.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to the members of the community for their engagement and the comments that they've made as part of this discussion. I want to turn back. I can find it right. I apologize if I did not address this as clearly as I thought I did, but I wanted to touch on the line of sight study a little bit, since that's been a concern. So what we were trying to highlight was that this is our building as designed, and that this is what can be built as of right. The red is what can be built as of right, and then we're going above that. This would be the roof for the as of right building. There would be residences from here down in either building. We have residents here. If someone were to put some type of amenity space on the roof of the as of right building, they would be here. So we absolutely acknowledge the fact that anyone along this facade has a view west. They have that view west whether we build our building, and they have that view west if someone builds a building under the existing zoning. That really can't change. So the question is, what are people going to see? So what you're really saying is from this point right here, which is the people in these townhomes above the fence at the alley, there is a view in each direction. And that happens regardless of what the height of this building is. Once you clear this first set of townhomes, then anybody in this space also has a view west. That's regardless of whether it's an as-of-right building or it's the building we're proposing. That's just the reality of what the line of sight is to the west. And just as someone pointed out, people can look from this direction west, and people from the west can look east at the building. Someone inquired about adding a green roof. We're going to satisfy the Green Globes certification that we've indicated and strive to do better than that.
But one of the things we learned as we explored the bird-friendly aspects of trying to enhance our design is that green roofs are actually a problem for bird friendliness. And so in addition, as we were evaluating what the implications of the different aspects of changes to the design would be, a green roof actually works against maintaining a bird-friendly building. I think part of the question that's come up about public benefits is what a public benefit is, and what the community, what the village has articulated in the zoning ordinance as being a public benefit. And I guess it is the case that not every resident of Wilmette will perceive what a public benefit is to be a benefit to them. So when someone actually says, in answer to a question, I don't see a public benefit to me, does that mean that that person doesn't believe that providing for affordable housing in Wilmette is a benefit to the overall community? So the benefits that we're providing are intended to follow what the guidelines are in the zoning ordinance and provide a broader benefit to the Village of Wilmette based upon what the Village of Wilmette has articulated are its goals and objectives for creating a public benefit, whether it's the sustainability features of our development, or it's the affordable housing of our development, or the fact that we're creating a public parking in an area and in a situation where people have talked in the comments section about a lack of sufficient public parking and concerns about the public parking accessible for, or the parking accessible for retail uses west of Green Bay. So we believe that these are all public benefits to the community of the Village of Wilmette. They may not be perceived by an individual resident of the Village of Wilmette as a benefit, but based upon what the village has articulated, we see that as being a series of public benefits for the broader community.
I'm here.
And I'm here. There's been a good deal of discussion about the master plan and the variances that we're asking for. The master plan spoke to a lot of issues. I think what the master plan, according to its own terms, represented was a series of goals and objectives for the village as it considers its future. And we believe that our development serves to fulfill many of those goals and objectives, and we've articulated that in our submissions to you, and I've articulated them to you at the prior meeting. The master plan acknowledges the fact that while it served to identify potential development opportunities on different parcels throughout the village center in particular, it acknowledged that it might not be able to achieve those objectives. And for a number of the sites, it said that it wouldn't be able to achieve the specific design parameters. I guess that's the better way to put it, because we believe we're achieving the objectives of the Village Center Master Plan in what we're doing. But the design objectives that we're doing are based upon the uniqueness of the site, what the current market conditions are, and how we're trying to achieve and fulfill those goals and objectives. And the PD process is intended to create an opportunity for the village to weigh what the proposed requests for changes are against the perceived benefit to having a development. That's what you all are going to evaluate and make a recommendation to the board, and then the board will make its own determination on the policy implications of that. But we absolutely believe that what we've put forth is responsive to the goals and objectives of the Village Center Master Plan. And we believe that it is an asset to the overall community, and we look forward to delivering this project into the village and enhancing the quality of life in the overall community. There was some discussion of parking and bicycle parking. We believe that the parking that we're providing for in our development is sufficient for both our residents and to meet the market demand that we think will be there. We do think there is a difference between what one might experience at a TOD here in Wilmette based on the people who we expect to live in this development versus what one might see in downtown Chicago. But we think that to the extent that there is excess parking capacity, that we would be able to utilize that excess parking capacity for other uses to further the benefits of the overall development, whether that relates to commercial tenants, guests of the residents, et cetera, that there's a means for us to handle additional parking needs. Mr. Chairman, while you've acknowledged that this is not an appearance review commission, I do want to note that the master plan itself does articulate the fact that there is not a distinct architectural style in the village center, that the appearance review commission that we volunteered to go before acknowledged that there is no distinctive architectural style to the village center. The master plan and the appearance review commission, when we appeared before them, both acknowledged the fact that there should be a diversity of architectural design in the village center district to enrich the experience that people have in the village center. If I may ask, Mr. Chairman, if any of the commissioners have any questions about our landscaping or our green globes, we do have some experts here who would be more than happy to address any concerns that any of the commissioners have regarding that.
I'd like to hear a little bit more from your landscape architect about what's proposed for the balconies.
Okay. I'd like to introduce Aaron Hillman with Collaborative V Design Studio. Do you need your slides here?
Yeah, get to the end. Let's go to the very end first. More. There we go. My name is Aaron Hillman. I'm with Collaborative V Design Studio. Optima, about 10 years ago, developed a vertical integrated landscape system that is truly state-of-the-art and one of its kind. It hasn't been done in Chicago. It's been implemented in multiple projects in the Phoenix area. Chicago, however, is at the forefront of green roof and vertical and integrated green architecture. Here's a couple of examples which kind of go through some of the designs. Most notably is the Whole Foods that has 5,000 square feet of literal vertical wall vegetation that was recently installed in Chicago. City Hall, as well as private residences. Millennium Park is a great example. All over structure, limited soil profiles, and are very successful. Here is a close-up of the terrace planters that were integrated in Scottsdale, Arizona. I realize the climate's different. It's a different plant palette. However, we work nationally, and what was developed to get this to work in Arizona will make this work really anywhere in the United States. Plant material is a little bit different, we understand that. But through a trial and error effort with local scientists, temperature, irrigation, fertigation, climate studies, all of these things went into a decade-long experiment before this was implemented into the Optima buildings. We've also looked at potential plant species that we feel are Chicago natives, are very evergreen, that will provide year-round interest, and will be very hardy. Obviously, hardiness and year-round is going to be the key for success on these terrace planters. And the real feel of it is to get them to drape and to fall. And so when you're looking at the last image at the Kierland project, that was taken less than 2 growing seasons from initial planting. If you look on the Optima website, there's some other images that you can see that has been 4, 5, 6, 7 years, and the draping effect is engulfing of the building. And so what we're proposing here with this vertical landscape system is integrating that into the planters that really adds a focal point, becomes a place of placemaking and uniqueness that really only Optima has done through their massive expenditure to even get to this point through trial and error in science. To talk a little bit more about it, it all starts in the, from a good water source, which is then fortified with nutrients and fertigation, is then piped through the building through a series of risers, and then out, and then micro-irrigation drip emitters to each individual plant, which can be refined based on each individual plant's need. Different exposures play into effect, and each side of the building has a different, unique look, feel. And it's been very successful.
In Arizona.
Sure, but green roofs are successful here, so the plant material works, and this works. Because this particular terrace planter hasn't been used here, the green roof system is a success across the board in Chicago. In fact, Chicago is one of the leading examples, other than the High Line that they've done in New York City, Millennium Park being overstructure. It works.
I don't disagree with you. They will come back the next year when spring comes around, but you need to show a picture in wintertime. I don't have a green thumb.
Sure.
Okay, I know I kill everything. Barely my kids survived. But I know around my house, things
Yes.
that are supposed to be sturdy, only bushes last in wintertime here.
The plants that are selected based on an evergreen value. So none of the plants selected on the list that we proposed in the packet will have a full dormancy period where it goes fully deciduous. To talk a little more about it, so to talk a little bit about it, so at their existing projects, 2 to 3 times a year, facility maintenance actually goes through the units to maintain them, both from hanging above and from the planters below onto each terrace. Plant replacement has been at a very, very minimum.
In Phoenix.
Sure.
Maybe we need to add that.
Sure. But if you look at the examples that we had kind of gone through at the very beginning for the green roofs in Chicago,
Every single one of those pictures is either in springtime, summertime, and I don't even see a fall picture.
Sure.
So what are we missing here? 6 months out of the year is going to be wintertime.
Understood. Now, the evergreen plant materials, unfortunately, they just don't get published. These jobs just don't get published for these photos during the winter.
There's a reason.
Sure.
Because I can tell you from firsthand experience, City Hall
Sure.
does not look like that.
Sure.
But maybe 45 to 60 days out of the year.
Sure.
So I appreciate a lot of advancements have been made, but, and I would tell you, every developer I work with, when they talk about a rooftop amenity and landscaping, they're planning for 4 seasons of plants.
Sure.
And they're planning for the winter to not be green. So I just think it's unrealistic to expect us to accept that these will look like beautiful plants 12 months out of the year.
Sure. And very much driving here today, coming down, beautiful tree-lined streets, the things like the ivy is still green. All the junipers are still green. The winter creeper is still green. Euonymus is still green. And those are very visible that you can see walking out of here today. And that's what you're going to see hanging off the building. We're not going to have the short-lived annuals and grasses and things that'll need to be plucked and taken. And those are the base foundation of your planting that's going to stay along those terrace planters.
And there's some pretty revolutionary advancements in soils in particular that are happening here, right here in Chicago.
Yes.
So I would hope you'd be, of course, on the cutting edge
And
of this technology.
we have looked too, and there's actually growers in Chicago that are focusing strictly on green roof plants that are ready to go. Specimen trees can be brought ready for the roof in lightweight soil that can be placed in these planters. And, I mean, I just can't argue with the science. The nutrients, the light, and the water, if those three things are there, you're going to have a successful plant.
So you mentioned an irrigation system. Is that integrated into the balcony planter system as well, or?
It is. It's all sole source. It comes from the basement through risers. Before it gets pumped out of the basement, it has a fertilizer injection system that carries that water up through mechanical chases in the buildings, out to the balcony planters. And each planter operates as kind of its own zone that'll be on a separate timed irrigation. Weather evapotranspiration system will be in place that knows through the satellite system that how much that plant is releasing and how much more it needs to take back in of oxygen. And that technology is available for all of us to even put in our homes on a small little irrigation controller. So takes the guesswork out of it. So.
Other questions on the landscaping? Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, Mr. Siegel, we got about 10 minutes to wrap up here.
The last point I really wanted to make was Amy was kind enough to remind me that when we're talking about the amount of funds that would be allocated for affordable housing, there's another $2 million of sale proceeds that would be generated by the for sale product that would then be recycled into the overall affordable housing program.
All right, very good. Before we get into our discussion, I'd like to entertain a motion to get the matter before us.
So moved.
Is there a second?
You have a second?
Okay. Discussion among the commissioners.
I've been going first all night.
I can look over here.
I have a question how everyone's thinking about the public benefit that's listed on the goals and policy of the comprehensive plan. That's not one of the things that's listed. It's more in the PUD process a requirement than listed as a possible public benefit. How much are people weighing what we want to be a vibrant retail space and all of that as a benefit versus just an assumed? And that's something that's come up. It's something I'm wrestling with and trying to come to an idea of. And I don't know if anyone has strong opinions.
Difficult to hear you back.
Oh, I'm sorry. I had mentioned how we think about the public benefit that's listed of advancing the policies of the plan of the village, retail and all of that, versus that being something that would happen as a requirement for being in the PUD process, or is it an actual benefit versus the exemptions that are being asked for?
I could talk in regards to the other PUDs that have been approved. We had a hotel that was approved out west, and obviously that's a different area. But the couple of things there: the fact that we're providing a service which the community does, and I wasn't with his grandchildren, but I've got something very similar. The provision of the hotel and the economic benefit of the hotel in that case was deemed to be a pretty significant public benefit. That was at a time we were in the recession, looking at ways to generate additional revenue was something the village was interested in doing. Having a hotel in the village, which we didn't have one, was important. 611 Green Bay Road, again, we were coming out of a recession, but that was a time in which, quite frankly, all the land in the village center had negative residual land value. You couldn't give it away and get a development in. And so the idea of development on that site absolutely was seen as a public benefit at that time. You know, that's, you have to then decide how you feel about that for this particular development in this particular time. But those were two instances. The other PUDs we've had recently, which is Artis, which is memory care, that was more to do with the fact that we had a center which we were pretty confident was not going to be successful anymore as retail. It was providing memory care for 64 households. It was deemed something that was desired for the village to get something like that, and you know, that was part of their public benefit. They had other things they did, including Green Globes and some provision for funding affordable housing. And the last one, which is HODC, who did got approval for 16 units of very affordable housing, and that's pretty straightforward what the public benefit was deemed there.
I do have a perspective on your specific question, though, which is whether their recitation of how this project advances the goals and policies of the comp plan and master plan, whether that's a public benefit or not. I view those probably less as public benefits and more as factors that help us evaluate whether the relief that they're seeking is, again, maybe not meeting the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law. So I guess in my mind, I don't put them in sort of the strong public benefit category, which I view as things that the developer is doing that they are not required to do, but are things that benefit the village as a whole, or are things that offset the relief that they are seeking.
I would piggyback on that with kind of a comparison of this site, which is really as close to a premier site in the center of the village for a market rate development that that is a marketable site, and in comparison with several projects that have the inherent benefit really within their use. The affordable housing, the use itself was in furtherance of a goal that had been very hard for the village to fill. The memory care center, again, addressing a dormant site that had been a challenge to address, and again, with a very public benefit oriented development. Here, where we have at the center of the village, I think that this is a very, I probably will have some people groan when I say this. I think it's this is an attractive development that fulfills core goals of our village master plan. Our village master plan is designed to bring bodies and households into the center, walkable distance to the downtown. However, I look at the benefits, and I see a lot of things that are called benefits that are really de facto requirements or de facto, expectations of the market for a development of this size and quality in a village like Wilmette or in a town of this type. And I look to, the idea that we call the level 2 Green Globes as a public benefit. It's not a public benefit. It's basically the state of the art for doing a high quality building. This is the price of admission. I congratulate the developer on the bird friendly design, and I think that this will be the most bird friendly design in the city's history, and it's to be commended. Improved stormwater management design. I struggle with how a development that fills 100% of the site footprint, the stormwater management is a public benefit. It's a requirement. It's a base requirement. You have to deal with the stormwater. A garage that serves the retail, is that a public benefit? It's a benefit to your development to have a garage that serves your retail. And then, as Commissioner DeGrio said, advancing the goals of the comprehensive plan you're requesting a plan development, and these are the requirements for starting the request, is that you meet the goals of the comprehensive plan. Those are table stakes. And I guess lastly, this may be a more of a personal issue to me, although I know a number of other people raised it. I continue to be concerned about the idea that there's a contribution for affordable housing rather than accommodating the housing within the development, where the developer has the control and the ability to do this. We're not the city of Chicago. We're not Evanston. We're not cities that have a housing department and have the infrastructure to develop an affordable housing program on our own. Here we have a development of over 100 units and a commendable donation, and we haven't had other donations like this, so I commend the developer for making it. But I also ask that the developer reconsider the allocation of that donation to be within the development so that we have confidence that on the same timeline that the development is implemented, that the affordable housing is also implemented. Because we know, many of us here know how difficult it was to develop just 14 units of housing a few years ago. We approved it over a year ago. They're still have not broken ground. And so my perspective is that it changes, to the Commissioner's question, I think it really changes on a site-by-site basis. And when we're looking at a premier site within the city, this is going to be, the front door to the village. This is what everybody sees when they arrive on the train, when they leave on the train, when they enter on Green Bay or Wilmette Avenue. And so I feel like there's a higher standard for a site like this.
Other comments?
We have another, someone on this, do we have an opinion on why, after relatively long economic expansion, it's still such an underutilized site?
I would think it would be having a willing seller, and a seller that came to a understanding with a buyer on a certain amount of money that would get them to give up the site. We have a lot of properties like that in the village. We have, the Chase Bank's one of the biggest sites. We've heard rumors that they're going to redevelop it, but, they control the site, the village doesn't.
Well, the same thing is true with the Imperial Motors site.
Yes. Yep. So
that it really is the the willingness of the current owner to move on it.
The applicant might be able to give more insight to that, but it's just really we've had a lot of people contact us, obviously, especially when Imperial Motors became vacant, interested in contact information for International Bank, and most people, including the owners of Imperial Motors, never got a call back. So it must have been the right time or the right situation for them.
When did Imperial Motors, when was that site vacated?
A couple of years ago. I don't know the exact time.
So definitely within the last 3 years.
Yeah.
So Seems like it's been a lot longer.
I was going to say the opposite.
At least on the long end of that, at least.
Yeah. I have no perspective.
Other comments?
I think it's more than 3 years.
Discussions?
I still have something I'm just confused on that you said on the line of sight. Were you saying that we are better off with this 62-foot where there'll be people living with the porches there versus 52 feet because you're doing a setback that's not by right, that you don't have to do? Or did...
What I was saying is that the amenity space on the roof...
I'm saying that the highest occupied space...
The highest occupied space is the equivalent of the roof of an as-of-right building, and so it then depends on what the programming is on the as-of-right building roof as to whether or not you would have the same ability to be on the western edge of that as-of-right roof and be able to have the line of sight both ways, right? But for us, we've set back, The comparison would be to someone being at their window at the top floor of our building as opposed to being on the roof of the as-of-right building.
But the fact of the matter is, whether it's 52 feet or 62 feet, somebody who's in the building certainly has views west that goes into the adjacent properties.
Absolutely. From 52 feet plus down, you're going to be looking west.
Thoughts on the height? Nobody has an opinion?
Well, I guess my only issue with that is if there are rules, regulations, ordinances written, at what point do we take them as they are? I mean, I agree that we keep moving the ball, and where do we stop? So I love Optima's designs. I mean, your buildings are, in my mind, at least they match my taste. So I want to tell you that, but at the same time, this isn't, I'm trying to keep my personal feelings, put that aside. And yes, the plan development, the master plan did not dictate the appearance, but it has things in it that sort of guide you somewhat. And we're saying, okay, we're not going to ignore those. It dictates what the height needs to be, and we're going to say we're going to ignore those. So where do we stop?
I think it ties back to the public benefit. I mean, there's a request for substantial relief, and somebody said as a 20% height variance. I don't know what the FAR variance is, but with substantial public benefit, there's reason to consider that. That's why we're here. That's our job as commissioners, is to weigh the public benefit against the change in the zoning. And so I think that's really the core question. For 20% relief on the height, for significant relief on the FAR.
There's actually no FAR on the site.
No
so there's
FAR,
no
okay.
FAR variation.
So we'll stick with the 20% relief on the height. Then what is the public benefit? And that's really our core responsibility as commissioners.
Right, but Jeff, I mean, we're talking about height right now, but they all add up. I mean, we have the height, then we have the issue with low-income housing. It really rubs me the wrong way. I agree with you that low-income housing should be part of this development, because once you let it go, we don't have control. And that's, I think, in previous plan meeting, I said the same thing. Low-income housing needs to be mixed with, other housing. So, okay, so if we separate all these issues and look at them as, just this is by itself and that's by itself, then yeah, we're going to say this one is okay and that one is okay. At some point, everything is okay.
I really can't divorce the height and think about it in isolation. I think to your point, you have to look at the entirety of the development, the entirety of what's being proposed, weigh that against the public benefit. Personally, I don't see the public benefits being offered as being sufficient to justify the extent of the entire package of relief that they're seeking. It's the height, it's the massing, the central street frontage, the orientation of things. You have to look at it. I have to look at it holistically. So I have a really hard time sort of looking at the height in isolation and deciding whether or not it alone is or is not too much.
And I'm not suggesting that we look at it as a single entity, but it's an issue that sort of has been talked around all evening long, and I wanted to at least get it on the table to have some discussion on it.
I agree with, the difference between 52 feet and, what you're doing in terms of line of sight. I agree with you. I don't think that's, with all due respect, I understand that people who live there have an issue with it, but they would have that issue regardless. But the fact of the matter is that the ordinance is saying something, saying this is the limit.
Well, in my mind, the line of sight studies were justifying the fact that they were going not at 62 feet, but at 72 feet and to 79 feet with the amenities penthouse and the elevator overrun, assuming that we were going to give them the 62 feet, and what we're putting on the top of the roof, nobody's really going to see, so it doesn't factor in. You know, the difference, from my perspective, the difference in the perception of the building on Green Bay Road, whether there's a substantial difference between 52 feet and 62 feet.
No, I think that's a fair point, that, you know, you can't look at it, you can't assume that an as-of-right project would just be a box. And, you know, it wouldn't necessarily look like, from a market standpoint, you wouldn't build that. So it's a little bit of, it's not an accurate representation of, you know, the line of sight study is not really an accurate representation of what an as-of-right situation would actually consist of.
And again, just my own personal opinion, I like the design of the building. In general, I've liked the design of most of Optima's development. Probably my least favorite one is the one there on Green Bay Road in Winnetka, which is kind of tarted up. I like the clean lines. I'm really concerned about the height and the massing.
Can we talk about the public benefit again, about specifically the affordable housing? I think we're discounting affordable housing quite a bit. What is, I guess the question I have for the board is, what's the percentage that of affordable, or how many affordable housing units would be actually in the building if we were to follow the recommendations? I think that's in
I believe 16.
There'd be 16, and we're talking about a $1.6 million donation that I think was represented would equal 14 units. That's just 2 units short of the recommendation.
I think the question is whether it's in the building or not in the building.
I'll get to that.
Okay, I'm sorry.
They were pooling other money to get that to happen.
I understand, but from my understanding, the affordable housing recommendations don't require it to be in the building. There's nothing that says that. That's just a recommendation that you would like to make. And so to just simply discount the $1.6 million and say, hey, that's really not that big of a public benefit, I think that's short-sighted. I think these are 14 units that could be allocated to people who actually need these units that are not there today. And that is a public benefit, period. It just is. It's just a matter of weighing that.
If the units could be built, I would agree with you.
Okay,
I just feel like
I understand
that that 14 units. So take those dollars, whether it's 1.6 or 2.8 million dollars, and look at the village of Wilmette. What's a vacant lot cost? $300, $400, $500. What's a very low priced building cost? $300,000, $400,000. The numbers. While if they, I can see the spreadsheet and it looks very nice, but the reality in actually turning those dollars into units when we don't have an internal infrastructure within the village, and when to help manage the funds.
But that's what this organization does. That's their goal. That's their mission. They're getting a donation.
3 or 4 minutes to respond.
I mean, that's what they do.
Right. So, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I mean, we're not simply writing a check. Right? We have found an organization, an incredibly reputable organization, and this is what they do. And they do it all along the North Shore, and this is creating an opportunity for their programming and affordable housing to be created in Wilmette, and in a way that provides sustainable affordable housing in Wilmette through the land trust structure that they have. And I just, since I want to also just note that part of this is being funded by some Wilmette residents who unfortunately are out of town tonight, but Alyssa Morganti and Fred Wilson. Fred is on the board of SEPA, and as we disclosed at the prior meeting, they have formed a foundation that is going to support this effort for affordable housing in Wilmette going forward. And if you'd like to hear more about what SEPA does, we can walk through the presentation that they did.
We're not going to open the floor back up again.
Okay.
And thanks for that. But I think in addition, I mean, we're talking about 14 units. If you put, the development doesn't get built with 16 units in the development. I mean, actually, I mean, could you address that? Can you build this development with 16 affordable housing units in the development?
No.
I'm not suggesting that it be 16. I'm suggesting that it be a number that is a residual of the $1.6 million commitment and any additional commitment that can be raised. I guess I would liken it to one in hand versus one in the bush, so to speak. That knowing that, as I said before, that we could agree on a number of units that would be that would work within the development at the contribution level that you've suggested, and any other funds that could be raised that would still allow the development to go forward, while at the same time knowing that the development goes forward and creates the units. The alternative is I work in the affordable housing business. It's a very difficult business. It's difficult in the best of circumstances in neighborhoods where you get the land for free or the buildings for $10,000. It's in Chicago it's a difficult business. In Wilmette, it's not an easy prospect, and I don't feel confident that the $1.6 million, though well-intentioned and appreciated, turns into units in the way that it's proposed. So, I was describing it to my wife as if the dollars are coming in francs or Deutschmarks. They're dollars, and they're well-intentioned, but they're not necessarily able to be used for the purpose that we intend them.
The only thing sorry.
Nope. We're done with discussion. This is a matter of the board discussing the issues now.
And I do want to clarify, I don't discount what they're proposing in the way of the affordable housing contribution. I think it's incredible. It's incredible, and not only just the dollar amount that they're willing to contribute a significant dollar amount, but that they've come to us with a proposed solution in SEPA, which is an amazing organization, and the model that they implement, that they propose, is a great model. So I don't discount that at all. For me, I look at the list of public benefits and I tick down them, and when you strip away those that are the price of admission or self-serving or intended to help us weigh, I really only come to, I'm left really with the bird-friendly design and the affordable housing donation. And for me, it's not enough to justify the significant amount of relief that they're requesting. These really ask us to balance a policy decision in favor of affordable housing, which, while it is a very important policy decision, it requires us to really ignore everything else. And I think I don't discount it. I do not expect them to to let up the pedal on that affordable housing commitment. I'm saying there has to be something more. If you want to, overbuild height, if you want to overbuild mass, if you want to, shrink the first floor, if you want to orient the building and include ground floor dwelling units, if you want to provide more parking, 1.65 ratio in what's supposed to be a TOD development that's across the street from the metro station, you have to come to us with reasons why that is going to produce overall a better outcome. And I'm not convinced.
Other comments?
By the way, I circled the exact same two public benefits that you just mentioned. Those are really the only two that I spot as well.
And to me, it's really that versus the 10 feet. That's the big ask.
The height.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, there are more, but really I think the majority of the concern is the height.
And I like the design. I think someone at the Appearance Commission said it, I keep repeating him, we have a variety of design in the village, and I think that's something that's positive about the village of Wilmette.
I can't remember who made the motion.
I think I initially made it.
What I'd like to recommend is that with the motion, we add certain conditions, and that really is to sort of codify some of the things that they have committed to do in their presentation, but, make the approval conditioned upon, meeting these promises. And the first one is, conditioned to meet a minimum of 2 Green Globe standards. And the second is a condition to, regarding the parking, where there's 23 parking spaces, on-site parking spaces for public use, limited to no more than 2 hours per visit, and not to be permitted to be used for valet parking. The third is, again, condition approval on the $1.6 million donation. And then the fourth condition is for the incorporation of bird-friendly glass on the lower third of the building, or 3 floors of the building.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I believe if we did the motion, it says that's in conjunction with the plans as submitted and presented, it would cover all that. I think conditions you would have are things that are either pulling away from that, saying we don't want that, or we do want that.
I just wanted to make certain that somehow in the entire approval process that...
Yeah, I think the motion would definitely carry with it as presented and as provided during in the application, which covers those things specifically. But if we wanted to, your conditions wanted to alter that, that would be appropriate conditions.
No, I just wanted to make certain we got that documented.
And I'm sure the applicant would agree.
Absolutely.
As presented, you would agree that that's the motion.
I'll just note we're doing 2 electric charging stations, too.
Are
Can I
we...
just clarify one thing, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
So the public parking is public parking. It is open to anyone and everyone in the village for use. We could have taken the approach to make it dedicated to only our retail customers, only people who patronize our building. But we have specifically designed the garage to be accessible to anyone for their use. And I had a conversation with someone associated with the library earlier this week, and we talked about the fact when they have evening programming, they run out of parking, and that their patrons could actually come over and use the parking when they have their evening programming. And if we continue to see that this development stimulates more development and investment in the village center, it becomes an even more valuable public benefit to have unrestricted public parking at our building.
Thank you. Are we ready to call the question?
Two other quick things. A lot of we've heard about is precedent that we're setting. Do we have, if the next building we just said no to everything, would we be putting ourselves in an awkward position?
So, no, essentially each property is unique. So if this exact project came in and it was, and with the exact same properties surrounding it, there'd be a good argument for them to make that you meet precedent. But each property being unique, any other property is not going to have this residential behind it, or may not have residential behind it, may have a different height building next to it. So everything that you take into account today won't necessarily translate to the next application.
The only other thing I thought we should discuss is, do we think the accommodations we're making to enhance the village will be good for the property values in the area, or not affect, or have a negative effect?
Residential property?
Yeah.
Or commercial property, or?
I guess both.
Both.
I don't know if anyone has.
I mean, I personally think that there is benefit to the village, both in increasing housing opportunities, in increasing potential for retail space. I think from a vitalization standpoint, if you look along Greenway Road right now, it's like somebody with a bad set of teeth. There are a lot of open. It's very porous, And, you know, as we're moving forward and looking at redeveloping these properties, you know, this development proposal does help to get rid of a lot of open surface parking lot, but also helps to reinforce the street edge. And I think that helps to create a much stronger street presence for the village along Green Bay. Again, my personal opinion.
I would just say that I agree completely, and I think that this could be a very good development for the village, but I would, rather than move to approve with conditions, I would rather have the developer take another look at the public benefits and come back to us for I hate to have a third meeting, but I think that we've raised a number of questions on public benefits, and a number of us have, and we've thrown out ideas about where we think that the benefits are lacking, and ask that the developer consider coming back to us, having taken another look at the public benefits, and then proceed from there, because I agree that this is that the building, I think that we're all in agreement that the building in general meets the goals of the master plan and would be a positive addition. But as I think most of us have said, that the relief or the benefit relative to the relief seems mismatched.
Other opinions on that?
I concur.
Okay. Then, is there a motion to continue?
I think.
What does motion to continue mean? Because I don't concur.
Okay.
The third meeting is, we've had two. There's still a village board meeting. That's the third meeting.
So currently the motion on the floor is to approve.
Correct.
Is to approve as submitted by plans and as presented today.
Correct.
There's no additional conditions on that. If there's a motion, a subsequent motion that it's the motion to continue, I would, in this situation, I think the applicant would have to be agreeable to that, because the applicant can also say that I would just like you to vote today. So I don't think a third meeting, if a third meeting is not going to be beneficial to this commission, because the applicant is already at the point where they've given it, then let's not waste the effort and the time by all of us here. But if it is, by all means, let's do it. I mean, I'm here. I'll be here anyway. So.
No, thank you. That was my point. Yeah.
You know, I would like to make the point that to get an affirmative recommendation to the village board, we need 4 yes votes. If it goes to the village board without an affirmative recommendation, then it takes a supermajority vote of the village board to approve. So I just want to make certain everybody's aware of that. All right. Are we ready to call the question?
I'll let somebody else do it.
Do you want to ask the applicant if they would be willing to?
Right.
I think.
Well,
And why not?
I will formally ask you. Is it based on the discussion in terms of the public amenities and the benefits to the public? Do you see an opportunity for altering the proposal to increase those benefits?
No, Mr. Chairman, we don't.
Thank you.
So procedurally, now the motion on the table, again, is to motion to approve as with plan submitted. If there's no more discussion, then there's no need to call a question. It would just be a roll call.
That's right. Okay. Mr. Adderley, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Shepherd?
No.
Mr. Taylor?
Yes.
Mr. Schwab?
Yes.
Mr. Head?
No.
Ms. Gamey?
No.
Ms. Dregrino?
No.
Chairman Bradford?
The chairman votes no. That's a negative recommendation. It will be at the village board on February 25, and I would suggest you be there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Is there any other business to come before us?
There is not.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Wait, do we have any public comment for the
Yeah, we
public?
just have to ask if there's any additional public comment.
Not related to this.
Doesn't,
If there's any other additional public comment?
not related to this agenda item. Yeah.
Okay. Seeing none.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.